I've rebuilt cities after hurricanes and testified before Congress, but nothing prepared me for the moment my own sister called me a glorified assistant in front of 200 guests. The laughter that followed? It didn't sting, it carved. That night, in a room filled with billionaires, my mother's tight smile said it all. I wasn't part of their story. But what they didn't know was that the woman they dismissed had signed off on disaster zones, held dying children, and changed lives. Tonight, the truth would break their perfect illusion, and I wasn't going to look away when it did. The ballroom was everything you'd expect from the Cole family. Glass chandeliers dripping like icicles, champagne flutes catching candlelight, and a 4-piece string quartet playing Vivaldi as if they'd been born into it. I stood near the outer edge of the crowd, watching it unfold like a stage play I had no part in. My name is Dr. Claudia Reese, and I've overseen emergency response for 3 Category 4 hurricanes. I've coordinated evacuations across 4 states. But tonight, I was just the older sister. I came in quietly through the side entrance. No valet, no red carpet. My dress was simple, black, elegant, and deliberately unnoticeable. I didn't want to be seen. Or rather, I knew I wouldn't be, not really. Tessa, my younger sister by 6 years, shimmered in champagne silk. She glowed the way only people raised to be adored can glow, smiling effortlessly, touching elbows, making small talk with senators and startup founders like she'd invented charm. Brendan, her fiancé, stood at her side, square-jawed and camera-ready, heir to the Cole political dynasty. Mom spotted me first. Her lips curved into that tight-lipped expression she reserved for disapproval disguised as civility. "You made it," she said. "Tessa invited me," I replied. Her eyes scanned my dress with practiced speed. "You could have called. I would have helped you find something more flattering." "I think I'm fine," she didn't argue. That wasn't her style. With Mom, silence always said more. "Come," she said, taking my elbow with a grip that seemed more like control than affection. "They're about to toast." We reached the main floor just as the clinking of crystal demanded quiet. Tessa stood centre stage beneath a floral arch, radiant. Brendan placed a hand on her back, like a politician ready to introduce a senator's daughter. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Tessa began, her voice light, melodic, trained. "Brendan and I are overwhelmed by your love and support. We wouldn't be here without our families." She turned toward our father, who smiled proudly, then toward Mom, who blinked slowly, like royalty. And then she looked at me. "And of course," she continued, her voice brightening with a tone I knew too well, "my sister Claudia. She's here tonight, tucked in the corner, where she's always most comfortable." Laughter, polite and oblivious, rippled across the room. "She's always been the practical one," Tessa said. "While I chased dreams, Claudia, well, she kept everything filed and sorted back home. She's brilliant with forms." Another wave of laughter. I felt my stomach tighten. "She works in... what is it, Mom? County emergency paperwork?" "Something like that," Mum said lightly, not meeting my eyes. Tessa giggled. "Anyway, she keeps the bureaucrats in line. And hey, someone has to make sure the toner gets replaced, right?" The laughter this time was louder. I stood frozen, glass in hand, watching my sister turn me into a footnote in her fairy tale. "And so," Tessa lifted her flute, "here's to family, even the quiet ones who choose the safe path." Everyone drank. I didn't. In that moment, the chandelier above us gleamed brighter than ever, its light pouring over people who had no idea what I'd seen, what I'd built, what I'd survived. And yet, the worst part wasn't their ignorance. It was that my family had orchestrated it. I felt the chill of old pain crawling back up my spine, not because I needed recognition, but because I'd stopped expecting it. Tonight was just another page in a book they'd written without me. As the crowd dispersed, I moved back toward the shadows, toward the comfort of being unseen. I'd made my appearance. That was enough. That was all they ever wanted. But then, Someone touched my arm. Dr. Reese? A woman, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a twist and eyes sharp enough to slice steel. She wore a navy suit, tailored and authoritative, not a guest, a power player. I thought that was you, she said. You coordinated FEMA Region 4 last hurricane season, didn't you? The tri-state response. My throat dried. I nodded slowly. You saved thousands, she whispered, not with awe, but with certainty. I glanced toward the crowd. No one was paying attention yet. But this was the moment everything began to shift. My instincts kicked in. Years of high-pressure briefings and classified coordination taught me how to read a room and how to disappear in one. I leaned in, speaking low enough that only she could hear. You're mistaken. The woman tilted her head slightly. Oh, I don't think I am. Claudia Reese, PhD from Stanford in Disaster Management, Director of Operations, FEMA Region 4. You testified before the Senate Subcommittee on National Emergency Readiness last March. I was in the gallery. I took a slow breath. And you are? Lydia Kemp, she said smoothly, National Affairs Editor, The Atlantic, and I'd kill for an interview. I smiled, polite and practiced. Tonight's not the place. Of course not, she handed me a card. But I'm glad to finally match the name with the face. Your work, especially the Tennessee River Flood Containment Project, remarkable. I took the card, tucking it into my clutch without looking. Behind me, someone was watching. Tessa. She stood 10 feet away, one arm looped through Brendan's, the other holding a flute of champagne now only half full. Her expression was unreadable, the kind she wore when the world around her started slipping out of her grip. Beside her, Brendan's brow furrowed slightly as his gaze flicked between me and Lydia. He leaned in, whispering something. Tessa shook her head a fraction too quickly, smile returning just in time for a guest to approach. I turned to leave again, but Lydia touched my elbow. Before I go, I have to ask, why let her say those things about you? Just now, during the toast. I didn't answer immediately. My throat was tight. I finally said, because no one in that room would have believed me. Lydia studied me for a moment. Well, they might now. She walked away without waiting for a response. I stayed where I was, invisible again, but now with a tremor running through the crowd. Small, subtle, but growing. And then Brendan approached. He was taller than I remembered. We'd only met once, briefly, at some rushed lunch 2 years ago where I was mostly an afterthought, but now he was looking at me like he was seeing something unfamiliar. Hi, he said. I didn't know you were here. I raised an eyebrow. I was invited. Right, no, I meant... He glanced around, voice dropping. I didn't realize you were that Claudia Reese. I said nothing. I just overheard Lydia Kemp. You're with FEMA? The national FEMA? I lead regional operations, I said. I've worked disasters across 12 states. He blinked, then laughed softly, like he wasn't sure whether to be impressed or skeptical. Tessa said you do local admin stuff. County paperwork, I echoed. He nodded slowly. She always said you were more of the behind-the-scenes type. I met his eyes. Is that a problem? No, he said quickly. Not at all. Just surprising. And why? Because her narrative was so compelling? He gave a small embarrassed smile. I guess I never questioned it. That's the thing about family myths, I said. They're convenient until someone checks the facts. He opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the string quartet paused. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, and someone announced dinner was served. The crowd moved again, a river of silk and tuxedos, shifting toward the next spectacle. I let them flow past me. Behind me, Brendan hesitated. Do you mind if I ask, why didn't you ever correct her? I turned. The question was quiet, but it echoed louder than any toast. I met his gaze without blinking. Would you have believed me? I asked. Or would you have assumed I was bitter? He didn't answer. Tessa approached seconds later, breathless and gleaming. "There you are," she chirped. "We're being seated. Brendan, come on." He didn't move. "She's not county admin," he said softly. "She's FEMA leadership. Testified before Congress." Tessa froze. For a second her mask dropped. "What?" "She's not what you said she was." I watched the cracks form, small but real. Her gaze snapped to me, disbelief flashing like static. "Why wouldn't you just say something?" "I did," I said. "You weren't listening." She scoffed, loud enough for a few nearby heads to turn. "You let me look stupid in front of everyone. You did that yourself." The words weren't loud, but they landed hard. A silence fell, not over the whole ballroom, just in the pocket around us. But it was enough. I stepped back, letting the weight of her humiliation settle in her own hands. And I realized I didn't feel sorry. Not anymore. I was 10 when I first understood I didn't matter as much. Tessa had just turned 4, and my birthday party had been moved, again, because Mom said it made more sense to combine them. That year, Tessa got a Barbie dream house, a magician, and 36 kids from her preschool. I got a slice of cake and a polite pat on the shoulder. No one noticed I hadn't blown out my own candle. By 13, I stopped asking for separate celebrations. By 16, I stopped expecting them. It wasn't that they were cruel. That would have been easier to fight. No, my family specialized in a quieter kind of erasure, the kind wrapped in smiles and phrases like, "You're just more independent," or "Tessa needs more attention right now." The implication was always that I should be proud to require less. So I adapted, I read more, stayed quiet, focused on grades, internships, practical things. By the time I graduated top of my class at Stanford, no one flew out for the ceremony. Mom said it conflicted with Tessa's spring gala. Dad forgot entirely. The day I received my appointment to FEMA, I called home. Mum answered. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice cheerful. "I can't talk long. Tessa's bridal fitting is today." "I just wanted to share some news," I said, feeling stupid even before the words came out. "I've been offered a regional director position, Southeast. It's a big deal." She paused. "Oh, that's nice. I'm sure Tessa will be proud." She never asked what region, what the role involved, how I felt about it. She moved on to discussing flower arrangements. I hung up before I started crying. Later that year, when Hurricane Eliza hit the Gulf Coast, I worked 19-hour days for 3 weeks straight. We mobilized 2,300 volunteers, distributed 400 tons of supplies, and evacuated over 100,000 residents. CNN did a segment on our operation. I was named in the credits once. No one in my family mentioned it. I sent updates anyway, postcards, press clippings, even a copy of the thank you letter I'd received from the governor, each time silence. Once I mailed a care package to Tessa, photos from Eliza, a commemorative pin, a note that simply said, "Thought you might want to see the kind of work I do." It came back unopened. The label said, "Return to sender, no longer at this address." But I double-checked the address twice. She still lived there. The message was clear. They weren't just forgetting me, they were choosing not to see me. The next Thanksgiving, I didn't go home. I told them I had deployment protocols to manage, which was partly true. Mum texted, "Okay, we'll miss you," with no follow-up, no call, no attempt to rearrange. That was the year I stopped sending updates. Still, some part of me kept hoping. Maybe if I reached a certain level of success, if I earned enough distinctions, awards, or press, they'd have to see me. They'd be forced to acknowledge I'd become someone. But then I remembered it wasn't about success. It never had been. Tessa's wins fit their story. Mine didn't. She was the socialite with magazine spreads and philanthropic brunches. I was a field operator who wore mud-stained boots and spoke in acronyms. Her life was easy to brag about. Mine made people uncomfortable. So I became invisible by design, safer that way. That night, standing in the shimmering shadow of her party, I realized something else. They hadn't changed. But I had. Years ago, I would have taken her speech as gospel. I would have laughed along, tried to make her feel better, made excuses for her lies. But now I saw it for what it was: smallness. Tessa had spent her entire life performing for our parents, for society, for whatever man had the right last name. She needed me small because she didn't know how to shine without contrast. And Mom needed the illusion of unity more than the reality of truth. A perfect family with one daughter in vogue and the other quietly filing papers. They had erased me, but I was done cooperating. The ballroom buzzed with conversation again, the energy shifting as guests moved from flutes to foie gras. I lingered by the perimeter, watching couples glide across the marble as if the night had no weight. I'd spent my entire life orbiting this world, close enough to glimpse its shine, never welcome enough to stay. A waiter passed with champagne. I declined. Alcohol dulled instincts, and tonight I needed every one of mine sharp. Tessa had disappeared into a swirl of admirers near the head table. Brendan stood off to the side now, alone, staring down at his phone. He looked up and our eyes met. He didn't smile. Part of me expected him to come over, maybe ask more questions, but he didn't. He just watched, then slowly turned away. Typical. That's when I felt it, the vibration in my clutch. A text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I always knew you were more than they let on. A. I stared at the screen. A? Could it be? I typed quickly. Who is this? No reply came. Just the blinking cursor mocking me. I slipped the phone back inside and exhaled slowly. The past had a way of finding you, even when you buried it deep. Across the room, a familiar voice rang out, my mother's. She was laughing at something one of the Cole uncles said. Her laughter always came a beat too late, like she'd memorized when joy should land, but never quite felt it. I approached cautiously. She turned and spotted me, her smile thinning. Claudia, she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Everything all right? Fine, I said. Just absorbing the evening. She nodded. Tessa's done so well for herself, hasn't she? I didn't answer. She pressed on. Brendan's family is incredibly well connected. His father's on the board of 3 universities. Impressive. I just hope, she hesitated, voice lowering, that things stay uncomplicated. I tilted my head. Uncomplicated how? She flinched slightly. Well, with all that happened earlier, Lydia Kemp speaking to you, that sort of thing tends to create questions. You mean truth? I mean attention, she said quietly, and this night is supposed to be about Tessa. There it was. Even now, with the lies unravelling, with strangers recognising me in a crowd, she still wanted the narrative intact. I wasn't a daughter. I was a disruption. Why didn't you ever come to my graduations? I asked suddenly. Her eyes widened. What? Stanford. FEMA Academy. My first command post. You always had a reason, always something more urgent. That's not fair. It's honest. She looked away. We supported you in our own way. No, I said calmly. You supported the version of me that stayed out of frame. You supported the daughter who didn't make you explain anything at cocktail parties. That's not true. I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened my email. Scrolled, clicked, held it out. An image filled the screen, me standing beside the governor of Georgia, both of us flanked by National Guard officers. I was receiving a medal. It was on the front page of the Atlanta Journal, I said. I sent it to you, twice. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And the care package I sent to Tessa? I don't know what you're talking about. Returned to sender, but she still lived there. She never mentioned... She didn't have to, I said. You all made your choice, pretending I was less complicated than I am. There was a beat of silence. Then she tried to smile. Can't we just enjoy tonight? You can, I replied, but don't ask me to help you lie anymore. I walked away, the conversation settling like ash behind me. Tessa caught me near the terrace. Her eyes were glassy, cheeks flushed. What was that with Mom? She asked. Closure, I said. She frowned. You're ruining this night. No, I corrected. I'm finally refusing to be erased from it. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, a man stepped forward from the crowd, tall, clean-shaven, with a purposeful walk. Dr. Rees, he said, extending a hand. Senator Wells, we met briefly after your Senate testimony. I shook his hand, noticing how Tessa's posture stiffened. Of course, Senator, it's good to see you. He smiled. Didn't know you were related to the bride. Small world. I glanced at Tessa. Smaller than you'd think. Senator Wells was the kind of man who commanded space without asking for it. The moment he approached, nearby guests subtly adjusted their posture, leaned in, quieted their chatter. Influence didn't need to shout when it walked in with a navy suit and a Senate pin. It's rare to see you outside a hearing room, he said with a chuckle, clasping my hand with both of his. You made quite the impression last spring. Some of my colleagues still talk about your projections on federal disaster funding. You rattled a few ivory towers. I just told the truth, I replied, and made it impossible for them to keep ignoring it, he added. Good work. Tessa's smile was stretched so tight it might crack. You've met my sister before? Senator Wells turned, only now noticing her. Ah, you must be Tessa. Congratulations on the engagement. Thank you, she said quickly. I wasn't aware you knew Claudia so well. Oh, we go back a bit, he said. I've worked with FEMA on several oversight initiatives. Your sister's a star, smart, composed, unshakable. If I had my way, she'd be running the whole department. Tessa blinked. She's more useful where she is, I said gently. Less red tape, more action. The senator grinned. Fair enough. Still, when they start shortlisting for national security advisory roles, don't be surprised if your name comes up. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Tessa coughed lightly, pretending to sip her champagne. Wow, that's something. Something well earned, he said. Anyway, I'll let you enjoy the evening. Just had to say hello. Don't be a stranger, Claudia. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a silence so loud it vibrated through my ribs. Tessa turned toward me, her expression a blend of disbelief and tightly veiled panic. What was that? That, I said, was someone who actually pays attention. You're being considered for a federal advisory role? I'm on the radar, that's all. She looked away, a flush rising in her cheeks. Why didn't you ever tell me? You never asked. I shouldn't have to ask to know something that big. No, I said calmly. But you do have to listen, and you haven't done that since we were kids. Her jaw clenched. This isn't the time, Claudia. No, I agreed, but you made it the place. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed her glass on a nearby tray. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? I almost laughed. There it was, the truth of the moment, raw and unfiltered. Not, I'm sorry, not I didn't know, but how does this affect me? You'll be fine, I said. You've always been fine. You made a fool of me. I didn't say a word during your speech. You didn't need to. That reporter, the senator, Brendan, everyone's looking at me like I'm some kind of manipulative liar. I held her gaze. If the shoe fits. Her mouth dropped open slightly, then shut just as fast. She turned sharply and stalked away, leaving behind a trail of whispers. The facade was cracking, and I wasn't done yet. I stepped outside onto the terrace, the cool air biting through the warmth of the ballroom. Lights twinkled in the distance, the city spread below like a map of other lives, lives that didn't include me being minimized, repackaged, or dismissed. A voice interrupted my thoughts. That was unexpected. I turned. Brendan. He leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets, eyes not meeting mine. You handled that well, he said after a pause. Handled what? All of it. The senator, Tessa losing it, the truth. I studied him. Why are you out here? He exhaled slowly. trying to make sense of what just happened, of who I'm marrying. That caught me off guard. She's not a bad person, he added quickly. But this isn't the version of her I know. Maybe it's just the one you've refused to see. He looked at me then, really looked. How long have you been doing this work? 15 years? I said. He nodded, processing. And no one in your family talks about it. Not if they can help it. He ran a hand through his hair. That's insane. It's normal, I said. Insanely normal. We stood in silence, the city lights pulsing below us. Then Brendan said, almost to himself, I think I owe you an apology. No, I said. You owe yourself better questions. The door to the ballroom creaked open behind us. Brendan glanced back and stiffened. Tessa stood there, framed in golden light. Her silhouette was perfect down to the fall of her hair over one shoulder, but her eyes were sharp, cold. She'd seen us together. You two look cosy, she said, voice dripping sweetness edged with steel. I didn't move. We were talking. Oh, I'm sure, she said. After all, there's so much catching up to do when your sister's been hiding national security secrets like it's a hobby. Brendan's posture straightened. Tessa. But she was already walking toward us. You know, she said, turning to him, you could have told me my sister was one of the most powerful emergency responders in the country, would have saved me a lot of embarrassment. He blinked. I didn't know. You never mentioned it. Because it wasn't relevant, she snapped. To who? I asked. She ignored me. Do you know what it's like to have your carefully planned evening hijacked? Do you know how hard I worked to make this night perfect? You worked to make it perfect for everyone but me, I said. She whirled on me. Because it's not your night. It never was. But you made me part of it, I replied. You made me your punchline. You made sure I was small, harmless, forgettable. Because that fit your story. Tessa's eyes glistened, not from pain, but from fury. You always thought you were better than us. No, I said, stepping forward. I just stopped waiting for you to notice I was enough. Brendan looked between us, speechless. Tessa's voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. You think this changes anything? You think they'll see you now? I don't need them to, I said. I just needed you to stop pretending I didn't exist. She shook her head, something almost like grief flickering across her face. You really think being a big shot in Washington makes up for years of silence, for staying away, for choosing work over family? I never stayed away, I said. You pushed me out. Every time I called and you didn't answer. Every milestone ignored. Every email unopened. You chose distance. I just stopped chasing your approval. The words landed between us like a slap. Behind her, Brendan was still frozen, his eyes scanning my face like it held a map he'd never read before. I don't even know who you are, he said finally. Tessa turned to him, her voice breaking. I'm still me. No, he said, quiet but firm. You're not the woman I thought you were. She stared at him, stunned. So what? You're taking her side? I'm trying to figure out which side tells the truth. Tessa's mask shattered. You're unbelievable. She turned and fled back into the ballroom, leaving silence in her wake. I leaned on the balcony railing, the tension finally draining from my shoulders. Brendan stood beside me, unmoving. After a minute, he spoke. She told me your job was boring, that you processed permits and did logistics. I nodded. She always liked to keep things simple. But she knew she had to know who you really were. She didn't want to, I said. It complicated her version of reality. He exhaled hard. I need to rethink a lot. That's your choice. Would you have said anything if tonight hadn't played out like this? I came to keep the peace, I admitted. I stayed because someone needed to tell the truth. He glanced down at the card I'd handed him earlier. He'd kept it in his jacket pocket, fingers brushing the edges like it might burn. "Is this really who you are?" he asked. I turned to him. "Every word." He studied me a long moment, then gave a small, sad smile. "You deserved better." "I gave up waiting for that a long time ago," I said. "Now I just demand it." The wind picked up, rustling the silk curtains behind us. I looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, real people were preparing for storms, for floods, for loss. And I would return to them, to the work that mattered. But tonight, I had delivered a different kind of emergency response, one that exposed a different kind of damage, and it had finally been seen. I didn't go back inside. The warmth of the ballroom, with its chandeliers and orchestral crescendos, felt too artificial, too curated for the version of me I'd just buried. I stayed on the terrace, letting the wind pull at the edges of my dress, grounding myself in something unfiltered. A door clicked open behind me. I didn't turn around. I expected Brendan or another curious onlooker. But it was my father's voice that found me. Quite the spectacle. I turned slowly, surprised he'd left his post near the head table where he usually held court, nursing whiskey and basking in proximity to prestige. "I didn't realise you noticed," I said. "I always notice when someone drops a grenade in the middle of a party." I arched a brow. "Then maybe you should have checked who pulled the pin." He approached with the cautious gait of a man not used to confrontation. His suit was impeccable, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. "You embarrassed your sister." "She embarrassed herself." "You made us look foolish." "No," I said, voice calm but cold. "You looked foolish because you were foolish. The difference is now everyone sees it." He flinched slightly but recovered. "You've always had a flair for drama. And you've always had a talent for absence." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with everything we'd never said. Every cancelled weekend visit, every missed school event, every phone call that ended with, "Sorry, I'm boarding a flight." He finally spoke. "You could have told us about your work, your accomplishments." "I did." "Then maybe you should have tried harder." My jaw tightened. "I sent press clippings, appointment letters, even handwritten notes. You never replied. Not once." He looked away. "You were too busy flying to conferences with Mom," I said. "Too busy playing power couple to notice the daughter in the background." "That's not fair." "No," I snapped. "What's not fair is rewriting history now that the truth is public." He inhaled slowly, as if the air might help him frame a better defense. Then he said, "We thought you were okay, that you didn't need the same kind of attention." "Need isn't the issue. Recognition is." He didn't respond. That, at least, was familiar. I turned back toward the city. "Why are you really out here?" He hesitated. "Because Tessa's in tears and your mother is furious." "So, the status quo. She said you humiliated her, that you've always resented her." I paused, then said quietly, "I stopped resenting her when I realised she was just a mirror, reflecting everything this family values and everything it discards." He didn't deny it. Couldn't. "I worked disaster zones, Dad. I've held mothers sobbing over lost children. I've coordinated triage while knee-deep in floodwater. But nothing prepared me for the quiet violence of being invisible to your own family." His voice dropped. "We never meant to hurt you. You didn't have to mean it. You just had to do nothing." He looked tired then, older than I remembered. "Your mother and we always assumed you were the strong one." I nodded slowly. "I was. That doesn't mean I deserve to be alone." We stood in silence, side by side, not touching. The air between us wasn't mended, it was merely acknowledged. And maybe, for now, that was enough. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not a fix, but a start." "I know," I said, not because I forgave him, but because I needed to walk away clean. Behind us, laughter erupted again from inside, the string quartet launching into another classic. The illusion had recovered, but the cracks had spread. He turned to go, pausing before the door. "You coming in?" "No," I said. "I think I've had enough applause for one night." He nodded once and disappeared into the glow. I stayed behind, watching the city hum, not waiting for anyone to join me, not hoping someone would look back. Because finally I wasn't trying to be seen. I already was. The ballroom door shut behind him with a soft click, sealing the warmth and the weight inside. I lingered on the terrace, letting the silence fill in the cracks where family approval used to live. My pulse had steadied. My voice had stopped shaking. The armor I wore now wasn't steel. It was truth. And it fit better than anything they ever offered. A gentle voice broke the quiet. "You always did prefer fresh air." I turned. My mother. She walked with the poise of a woman who'd practiced for galas all her life, shoulders back, jaw set, pearls catching the moonlight. But her expression tonight was less rehearsed. She looked human. "I thought you might come," I said. She joined me at the railing, keeping a polite distance. "Your father said you wouldn't come back in." "He was right." She nodded, eyes on the skyline. "It's a lovely view." "I like the honesty of it," I said. "No curated smiles, no orchestras to hide behind." A pause. "I was angry earlier," she admitted. "Embarrassed." I didn't respond. "But mostly," she continued, "I was scared." That made me turn. "Of what?" "Of realizing I don't know my daughter," she said softly. "Not really." The words hit harder than any accusation, because they weren't defensive. They were real. I looked at her, really looked. At the woman who taught me how to blend in, how to make myself smaller so others could shine. At the woman who told me silence was noble and compliance was grace. "You didn't want to know me," I said. "You wanted the version that didn't disrupt the picture." She closed her eyes for a beat. That's true. It was the first time in my life she'd admitted something without spinning it. "I watched you tonight," she said, "watched how people responded to you. They respected you, admired you, and I realized I've spent more time learning the names of Tessa's decorators than I have reading your articles or understanding your work." "Why?" I asked, needing to hear it. "Why pretend I was someone else?" She hesitated. Then, "Because your success scared me." That stopped me cold. "You were so capable, so self-sufficient. You didn't need praise or help, or so I thought. And I told myself you were better off without the spotlight, that it would only complicate things." Tears burned behind my eyes. "It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about being seen." She nodded slowly. "And I didn't see you. I only saw what made my life easier." The truth hung heavy between us, but unlike before, it didn't suffocate. "I tried, Mum," I whispered. "I sent letters. I made calls. I gave you everything short of showing up in uniform and demanding recognition." "I know," she said, "and I failed you." She turned then, facing me fully. Her hands trembled as she reached out, not in command, but in uncertainty. "I can't undo what I erased," she said, "but I want to try, if you'll let me." I looked at her, at the woman who built a family from appearance and polish and perfection. And I saw her cracks too, the ones shaped like regret. "Trying," I said, "means showing up." "I will. Even when it's messy. Even when I'm not easy to celebrate." She swallowed hard. "Yes." I didn't take her hand, not yet, but I didn't turn away either. We stood there for a long moment, two women, shaped by silence, now learning the weight of speaking aloud. Inside, music shifted again. The tempo slower now. A waltz. "Do you remember when you taught me to dance in the kitchen?" I asked. She smiled. "You kept stepping on my toes." "I was 8. You said grace took time. I should have remembered that. Her voice cracked, and I realized we were both holding back tears for different reasons. She stepped back. Come home for Christmas. I'll think about it. Bring those FEMA disaster maps, she added, surprising me. I want to know what you see when you look at the world. I exhaled. Maybe, for the first time, she really meant it. As she returned inside, I leaned on the railing again, alone, but not unseen, not anymore. I didn't say goodbye when I left. No dramatic exits, no final words echoing off marble walls. I walked through the grand foyer alone, past flower arrangements and towering ice sculptures, each designed to impress, to distract, to dazzle. But no display could compete with the clarity I carried out with me. The valet brought my car around with practiced indifference, unaware that I'd just rewritten my role in a story 2 decades old. I thanked him, tipped generously, and drove into the cool night. Headlights, carving, a quiet path away from the Meridian Hotel and everything it stood for. The silence in the car felt earned. I didn't turn on music. I didn't check my phone. Instead, I let the stillness settle in my bones. After all the noise, the laughter, the whispered judgment, the orchestrated illusions, this was the first moment that truly belonged to me. Halfway home, I pulled over by the river, an old habit from my early FEMA days. It was where I'd come to think between deployments, to breathe after disaster zones, to remember who I was when the world forgot. Tonight, it felt like returning to a version of myself I'd almost lost. I sat on the hood of my car, watching reflections ripple on the water, city lights flickering like fragile truths. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Brendan. I don't know what comes next, but I think tonight changed me. I stared at the screen, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. Then another message arrived, this one from Tessa. You made your point, loud and clear. No apology, no reflection, just resentment wrapped in punctuation. I didn't reply. She wasn't ready, and maybe she never would be. But I didn't need her readiness anymore. I'd spent too many years trying to earn love that required erasure. Tonight I reclaimed space. I thought back to the senator, to Lydia Kemp, to Brendan's stunned silence when the truth surfaced. And beneath the satisfaction, there was something deeper, an ache. Not for lost approval, but for all the versions of myself that had been dismissed along the way. The overachieving teenager who stayed up late prepping debate notes while Tessa danced in living rooms. The 24-year-old who landed her first deployment in Louisiana, standing ankle-deep in floodwater with a clipboard and a purpose, thinking maybe this would be the thing that finally earned a nod of pride. The woman who worked in war zones of emotion and weather, always returning to a family who never asked what it cost her. I mourned them right there on that quiet roadside. Then I let them go. A third message arrived, this one from a number I didn't recognize at first. You don't know me, but I saw you speak in DC. You changed how I approach my work. Thank you. There it was again, the unexpected proof. That absence from one place didn't mean invisibility everywhere. That being unseen by your family doesn't mean being unseen by the world. And maybe that was the real shift, understanding that recognition didn't need to come from those who refused to see you. It could come from the ones who watched quietly and learned. I climbed back into the car and drove home, streetlights flashing overhead like Morse code, spelling out reminders in yellow and gold. When I arrived, my house greeted me with its usual silence. No one waiting, no champagne, no orchestras. But there were files on the dining table, disaster briefings and regional intel reports. There was a stack of thank you letters from survivors and field workers, and on the mantel, my latest commendation still in its packaging. I opened it, slid the certificate into a frame, and placed it beside the others, not because I needed the validation, but because I'd finally stopped hiding from it. In the kitchen, I made tea. In the living room, I sat beneath a blanket. In my chest, for the first time in years, There was no hollow space waiting for my family to fill. They couldn't, they wouldn't, but I could. The next morning came quietly, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty but earned, like the stillness after a storm when you're finally allowed to rebuild. I brewed my coffee slowly, the aroma filling the kitchen like a small ceremony. Outside, the sun stretched over rooftops, pulling gold threads through the grey. I stood barefoot in the doorway, mug warm in my hands, watching the light touch everything. Trees, mailboxes, fences, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. I wasn't the same woman who'd walked into that ballroom in heels and uncertainty. I was someone who had chosen truth over comfort, someone who had spoken when silence was the expected offering. The phone buzzed again. I expected Tessa, but it was from someone else, Lydia Kemp. Would you consider coffee? Off the record, just two women who know what it's like to be underestimated. I smiled. Next week, I'll bring the stories if you bring the questions. And I sent the message and placed the phone face down, letting the moment breathe. For once, attention didn't feel invasive, it felt earned. As I cleaned up breakfast, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The reflection wasn't striking. No designer gown, no camera-ready smile, just me. Hair loose, sweatshirt slouched, skin soft from sleep. And I looked more powerful than I had in any gala photo. I stepped into my office, a small room off the kitchen filled with maps, books, old awards, and current crises. On my desk was a folder labelled Winter Flood Projections Northwest. Back to work. Because that was the gift of truth. It freed you to keep going. As I reviewed data sets, my mind wandered briefly to Brendan. We hadn't spoken since the terrace. His messages had stopped after that first moment of vulnerability, replaced by the silence of a man rethinking the world he'd bought into. I didn't need closure from him, but I hoped he found clarity for himself. A knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it slowly. And there stood a girl, maybe 17, with a messenger bag slung over her shoulder and braces glinting in the sun. "You're Dr. Claudia Reese?" she asked. I blinked. "Yes?" She exhaled like she'd just passed a test. "My civics teacher showed us your Senate testimony, said you're the reason FEMA funding was reinstated in our district." I nodded, heart skipping. "That's good to hear." "I want to work in emergency response," she said quickly, as if afraid the words might dissolve if not spoken fast. "Not just locally, globally, but my counsellor says it's unrealistic, that it's too big." I opened the door wider. "Come in." She followed, eyes wide as she took in the wall of maps and awards. She paused at the photograph of me shaking hands with the president after a major response effort in Puerto Rico. "You really did all this?" she whispered. "I did," I said. "And I started with teachers like yours saying the same thing." She smiled shyly. "Could I interview you for our class project?" "Yes," I said, "but only if you promise to tell your counsellor that big dreams aren't the problem, small minds are." She laughed. "Deal." As I handed her a notebook, I felt something settle in my chest. Not pride, not vindication, legacy. Because while family had once made me feel invisible, strangers had begun to see me as a blueprint. Not a sister, not a shadow, a map. And that was worth more than any ballroom toast. We talked for an hour, her questions thoughtful and curious. Before she left, she asked if she could take a selfie. "Only if you tag me as that lady who broke the mold," I said. She grinned. "Done." As she left, I closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, overwhelmed, but not in a way that frightened me. In a way that felt like a door opening, not closing. Because sometimes the loudest echo of absence isn't grief, it's purpose. There's a strange thing that happens when people start to really see you, not the image they projected, not the version they preferred, but you. At first, it feels like freedom. Then it feels like risk. The week after the party, my inbox overflowed, journalists asking for interviews, former classmates reconnecting, distant cousins tagging me in family threads I'd been excluded from for years. And Tessa, she didn't call, but she posted a story on social media, a black and white shot of the engagement ring, her hand held delicately in Brendan's. The caption read, "Some people pretend to be something they're not. I've always been exactly who I say I am." The comment section ignited, half sympathy, half suspicion. And through it all, I remained silent, because the truth doesn't need defending, it only needs surviving. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew a storm was coming. Public exposure, even unintentional, always had a cost. That cost came in the form of an unexpected subpoena. I was called to testify before a Senate subcommittee, not for wrongdoing, but for insight. My recent press visibility had made me a prime candidate to speak on the effectiveness and failures of interagency disaster protocols. In other words, the spotlight had found me again, and this time it wasn't optional. The hearing was set for Monday. I flew into DC the night before, my nerves a strange mix of anticipation and dread. At the hotel, the concierge greeted me by name, his eyes widening slightly as he typed. "Are you the Claudia Reese?" I smiled politely. "Depends. Is she in trouble?" He chuckled. "No, ma'am, just you're trending on Twitter." Fantastic! I rode the elevator up in silence. At the top floor, I entered my room, minimal, elegant, impersonal. I dropped my bag and stood by the window. DC was glittering below, sharp and cold and full of stories. I had a new one now, not of tragedy, but of resilience. I pulled out my testimony draft and reviewed it line by line, facts, case studies, clear calls to action. But beneath it all was a question I couldn't shake. Was I ready to let the world see all of me, not just the judge, not just the crisis manager, but the woman who once begged her sister to attend graduation, the daughter who watched her mother beam for Tessa's college acceptance, but barely nod at her law degree? That woman still existed. She just wasn't running the show anymore. At 2 a.m, a message came through from Brendan. I left. I couldn't marry someone who builds their life by shrinking others. Thank you for opening my eyes. I stared at the screen for a long time. There were no fireworks, no butterflies, just a strange, unexpected tenderness. He wasn't a hero, and I wasn't a prize. But maybe, in the wreckage, we'd both found pieces of ourselves worth salvaging. I didn't reply. Some goodbyes don't need words. The next morning I stood before the Senate subcommittee in a navy blazer and steady heels, my voice clear, as I outlined floodplain failures and emergency gaps. They listened, they took notes, and when it was over, several approached to thank me. No one asked about Tessa, no one called me the sister of. I was simply Claudia Reese, and that was enough. As I stepped outside into the brisk air, reporters waited near the steps, their questions flying like darts. I paused, considered, then walked past without a word. Because sometimes the loudest statement is walking in your truth without begging anyone to understand it. Back at the airport, I ordered coffee and checked my messages. Nothing from Tessa, nothing from my parents, but 2 new voicemails waited. One from Lydia Kemp, another from a senator's aide, and one from a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Grandma Ruth. I played the voicemail. "Claudia, I saw you on TV. You made me proud. Don't let them shrink you. Ever." I smiled. Maybe the people who see us clearly are the ones we least expect. By the time I returned home, the world had moved on. The headlines faded. The social media frenzy quieted. People went back to caring about the next trending scandal, the next political gaffe, the next glittering distraction. But I remained changed. There's a strange peace in knowing you've been seen, fully, rawly, and that you're still standing. No mask, no curated image, just truth, naked and undeniable. I slipped back into work with ease. Emergency updates, FEMA coordination calls, new interns who blinked in awe when they met me, but I treated them all the same. Titles didn't make people real, actions did. One afternoon, while updating a disaster relief training module, my assistant knocked on the door. "There's a visitor," she said, her voice unsure. "She says she's your sister." I froze. "She's here?" I asked, voice low. "She's waiting in the lobby. Says she just wants 5 minutes." I stood slowly, each step toward the reception area feeling heavier than it should have. Tessa sat alone, her makeup lighter than usual, her hair pulled back in a low knot. She looked tired, less polished, more human. She stood when she saw me. "Hi." I didn't speak. "I came to apologize," she said. Still, I waited. "I thought I knew what success looked like," she continued, "what family should feel like. But I built a life around performance, and when your truth cracked through it, I panicked. I lashed out." She swallowed, eyes glistening. "I told myself stories about you because they were easier than facing the real one, the one where I wasn't the center, where you didn't need me." I crossed my arms. "And now?" She hesitated. "Now I realize I've spent my life auditioning for Mom, for Dad, for Brendan, even for strangers at parties. But you were doing the work, changing the world while I worried about seating charts." It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard her say. Still, I asked, "Why now?" She let out a breath. "Because Brendan's gone. Because the engagement is over, because Mum won't stop crying and Dad keeps saying it's just a phase, because the silence at night is louder than ever, and because I watched your testimony and realized you've become everything I pretended to be." Her voice cracked. "And I miss my sister." The ache in my chest surprised me, not because it hurt, but because it was still there, dormant, waiting. "Tessa," I said carefully, "you don't get to rewrite everything in one conversation. I know. You don't get to be the victim now that the applause has died. I know. And I don't owe you anything." She nodded, eyes full of tears. "But I'm still asking for a chance, for a slow, clumsy chance." I looked at her, at the sister who had once drowned me in dismissiveness, who had cut me out to protect her fantasy. And I saw not redemption, but an opening, not trust, but a thread. Maybe that was enough. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said. I wouldn't believe you if you were. "But I'm willing to try again," I added, with honesty this time, and boundaries. "Absolutely," she said quickly. "You can set the pace." "I will." We stood there, the weight of years between us, and somehow still managing to share space. Before she left, she turned. "One more thing." "What?" "Can I read your articles, the ones you published? I'd like to know what your voice sounds like when it's not filtered through family noise." I nodded. When she was gone, I returned to my desk and sat for a long moment, staring at the folder labelled Spring Tornado Response, Midwest. Even in healing, the world didn't wait. But maybe now I didn't have to choose between the two, because sometimes the cost of being seen isn't paid in public. It's paid in private moments of reckoning, where honesty slices through pride and reconciliation, if offered, comes slowly. But it comes, and that might be enough. 3 months later, I stood in front of a crowd of nearly 1,000, my voice echoing off the walls of the National Crisis Response Conference auditorium. "And that's the truth about silence," I said into the microphone, steady and clear. "It doesn't protect you, it buries you, until one day you claw your way out and realize you were never meant to disappear." Applause broke out before I could finish my final sentence. The audience rose to their feet. First a few, then all, clapping not just for the statistics or the solutions I presented, but for the woman who delivered them without apology. When I stepped down from the stage, I didn't rush to the wings. I stood there absorbing it. 'Cause for years I had only known applause as something given to others, sisters, colleagues, men in suits who repeated my words louder. But now it was mine, and I wasn't giving it back. Backstage, Lydia Kemp waited with a wide smile. "You know," she said, handing me a bottle of water, "you could run for office tomorrow and win." I laughed. "Let's not scare people just yet." She leaned in. "No, really, what you've done in the last 3 months, how you've shifted public perception, built coalitions, mentored young responders, it's nothing short of seismic. Truth has momentum," I said, "and you've become its anchor," she added. The praise didn't go to my head. I'd learned the hard way that validation from others couldn't patch what family rejection tore open, but it felt good, solid, like building a life from bedrock instead of sand. Later that night, I returned to my hotel room, a modest suite, no champagne, no entourage, just me and the echo of my own choices. I took off my shoes and walked barefoot to the window. Below, the city pulsed with a quiet urgency. Taxis weaved between late-night stragglers. Tower cranes blinked on unfinished buildings. And somewhere, a child would wake to sirens, another family learning what crisis really meant. My phone buzzed. A message from Grandma Ruth. "Watched you online. Damn proud." Also, "When are you coming for dinner?" "I made pecan pie." I smiled. Another buzz. From Tessa. "Sent your articles to my book club. They're obsessed. Also, I told Mum to stop comparing me to you. It's not helping either of us." Progress. Small, imperfect, real. As I changed into an old sweatshirt, I saw the envelope on the nightstand. I'd almost forgotten. It was hand-delivered by a representative from the governor's office earlier that day. Inside, a formal letter, a nomination, State Emergency Operations Chairwoman, a position that would oversee FEMA coordination, state-level funding and infrastructure preparedness. Top of the letter, my name. Not a suggestion, not a whisper, a declaration. I sat with it for a long time, not because I doubted my qualifications, but because I wanted to savour what it meant. I'd been chosen. Not by accident, not by proximity, but because I had made myself undeniable. I picked up my pen and wrote 2 words on the reply line: I accept. As I sealed the envelope, I thought about the last time someone tried to define me, tried to shrink me, called me a secretary, dismissed my life with a laugh and a toast, and I realised something. They never saw me coming. The following week, I stood at the head of a long conference table inside the governor's war room. The air was sharp with urgency. Hurricane season had arrived early. Seated around me were career responders, military liaisons, meteorologists, and infrastructure heads. All of them looked to me not for permission, but for direction. I didn't hesitate. "We don't wait for the water to rise before we move," I said, pointing to the projected storm track. "Pre-positioning shelters saves lives. Let's not wait for headlines to remind us." Nods followed, quick scribbles, clear eyes. This wasn't applause for a speech. This was trust, earned in the trenches. Afterward, the governor pulled me aside. "Your command presence is rare," he said, "but it's not just what you say, it's how you walk in." I smiled. I walk like a woman who knows what it costs to be underestimated. That night I drove home alone. My inbox held 2 invitations, one to an honorary dinner hosted by the State Women's Leadership Forum, another from a national news network asking to profile my rise from administrative mislabeling to state leadership. I deleted the second, not because I wasn't proud, but because I didn't need to build a career on proving others wrong anymore. The past had already done that. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a familiar figure sitting on my porch steps. Tessa. A coat wrapped around her tightly, hair slightly windblown, her face vulnerable in a way that felt new. She looked up as I parked. "Hey," she said softly. "Is this about the book club again?" She let out a laugh, short, unsure. "Actually, no." I joined her on the steps, neither of us speaking for a moment. The air carried the scent of pine and the distant hum of traffic. "I watched the governor's press conference," she said. "You looked powerful. Felt it." She turned to me. "You scared me, Claudia." I raised an eyebrow. "Because I stood up for myself?" "No," she said, "because you didn't need us anymore. And I realized how much I had relied on you staying small so I could feel big." The honesty stung, but I appreciated it. "I was small once," I said. "You just didn't see the growth." "I see it now." We sat in silence again, this time not from avoidance but from understanding. "I want to rebuild something with you," she said, "but not on the old terms." "What kind of terms?" "Truth, curiosity, and maybe letting go of the version of you I clung to because it made my reflection shinier." I studied her face. She wasn't posturing, she wasn't performing, she was just here. "That version of me never really existed," I said. "But I'm open to introducing you to the real one." "I'd like that," she whispered. She reached into her purse and handed me a small package, inside a framed photo. Me, from the news segment, mid-speech, surrounded by storm data, my hand pointing at the projection, eyes fierce. She'd had it printed and framed. "I figured," she said, "if Mom wants to keep the hallway portrait staged in ivory frames and false smiles, maybe you and I could start a new wall, one with truth." I blinked hard. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a second frame. This one was empty. "For your next moment." It was the most thoughtful gesture she'd ever made. I stood and unlocked the door. "Come in, I'll make tea." As she stepped inside, I realized this wasn't a finale. It was a prologue. To a sisterhood unburdened by envy. To a legacy defined by more than blood. Because in a world that once called me invisible, I had become something unshakable. And now they all saw me, clear as day.